Your technique should help you play better in tune and help you produce the sound that you want, not hinder you. But there are some bad habits that I see people getting into that greatly decrease accuracy. So in this lesson, I'm going to lay out the 4 most common bad habits that I see and explain how they prevent you from playing in tune. The first and probably most common bad habit I see people getting into is playing with collapsed fingers rather than curved fingers. Now, I know I've harped on this before, but it's very important for many reasons, and that includes your accuracy. So when you're playing with collapsed fingers, essentially what you're doing is you're putting your finger down, and then as you land, your finger is buckling backwards at that first knuckle above the nail like this. So there's that double motion going on. And when you do this, you might be aiming and you might actually land on a specific spot, but as soon as your finger bends, then you're hitting a different spot of the string, or your finger might actually scoot backwards or upwards. It's just not very great for your accuracy. You don't have a lot of control over where your finger is actually going to end up. Now, when you're playing with curved fingers, you don't do that bending motion. You're just landing with that hook on your finger, that hook shape on your finger, and then you stay there. And then on top of that, you've got a smaller space that you're dealing with when you're playing with curved fingers. You play on the tips of your fingers with curved fingers, which means that you're going to cut off the string at a very specific point, as opposed to when you play with collapsed fingers, you're playing on the pads of your fingers, which is a bigger space, which means a fuzzier sound. It's a squishier part of your finger, so you're not necessarily going to get as clear of a sound as you might when you're playing with curved fingers. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure in your practicing you're paying attention to how you're putting your finger down. It's all about the way that you're putting your finger down on the board. So when you're practicing, you want to practice slowly, and what I like to do is just break up really tiny motions like thumb to one, and watch and make sure I'm hitting the tip of my finger like this. And then again with 1 to 2. You just want to watch. If you put your finger down and then do this collapse motion, really focus on doing some slow practice and making sure you get this motion down, putting your finger down where it's curved and not collapsed. The second habit is playing with a tense arm and hand. Some people, when they get up into thumb position, it's like they've got this claw and they're just tensing away, and it's almost like they think that tensing is going to make it just so much easier, and it actually makes it a whole lot harder. When you're tensing and you're using muscles that you don't need to be using, you tire out easily. But on top of that, because your hand and your fingers are so rigid, you don't have as much control and you don't have as much flexibility. And both of those things, flexibility and control, are incredibly important when we're talking about intonation and accuracy. So remember in one of the earlier lessons, we talked about using the back of your arm, so that tricep and the shoulder, to dig into the string. Rather than using your fingers, you want to focus that energy to the back of the arm, not tensing your muscles, but just using that pressure from the back of your arm to dig into the string. And that's going to help you stay more relaxed. So when you're moving up and down the string, make sure that that back of the arm is where the energy and the force is coming from. So you can press down the string with a relaxed form in your fingers and in your hand like this. The third most common habit I see is people lifting up their fingers when they're not using them. Now, when I put my fingers down on the string, I see that motion as cumulative. So if I'm putting down my first finger, I think about putting down my thumb and my first finger. And then if I put down, say, my third finger, I think about thumb, 1, 2, and 3. But if I'm not using, say, my second or third finger, if I'm just playing on first finger, then you don't want to lift your fingers up like this, because that's an awkward position to begin with, and it's going to add tension where you don't need it. And as we talked about, tension reduces your flexibility, which reduces your control. And so instead of that, just hover your fingers over the fingerboard slightly like this. And on top of not tiring yourself out, you're going to have a closer space between the tips of your fingers and the fingerboard. So you're not going to have to go as far. So your fingers aren't going to have to search for that note, if that makes sense. If your fingers are just slightly hovered over like this, then they can hover over the space that they need to be and have a little bit more control over the accuracy and where you're actually placing your fingers. The fourth and final habit that I see people getting into is not staying consistent with their fingering method. Now, there's no wrong or right fingering method out there. It all depends on what you respond best to and what fits your hand and your body better. However, when you're first getting into this position, especially when you're in the upper positions, you want to really solidify that muscle memory. And the way that you do that is by staying consistent with the spacing in between your fingers. So two of the most common fingering systems I see are the one that we've gone over, where you have a whole step between thumb and 1 and a whole step between 1 and 3. But then the other fingering system that you'll see is thumb and 1 is a whole step, and then 1 and 2 with a whole step. And again, that's perfectly fine, and it works really great for a lot of people. But if you go back and forth between these two, it's going to be really difficult for your body to remember exactly where that whole step is. So when you're practicing, make sure that you're staying consistent with that fingering system, and then after you get comfortable in the upper positions, you can decide, now, is 1 to 3 really the best option for me for a whole step, or do I sound a whole lot better when I do thumb 1, 2? But while you're doing your exercises, and especially while you're doing this course, I would absolutely recommend staying with the fingering system that I am teaching you. So the reason that I and every other teacher in the world really stresses technique is not because we just want something to nag about. Proper technique helps in so many different ways. It helps with your accuracy, your intonation, your musicality, and it just makes playing a whole lot easier.